Hi again. My name is Adam Zaremski with Buffalo Niagara Waterkeeper. Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us for our second virtual Lunch and Learn during this Scajaquada September. We'd like to also thank some of our sponsors for making Scajaquada September possible. Many thanks to Labatt USA, M&T Bank, and the David and Joan Rogers Foundation. And I just want to remind everyone, if you haven't signed up for it or heard about it, our Solo Sweep Challenge is still ongoing for this month. You can join at any time. I've put a link in the chat for more info about it. Essentially, we're asking people to clean up around Scajaquada Creek watershed, record the trash they collect. There's some prizes for people who complete at least one cleanup and to the person who collects the most items during the month. You've got until September 30th to participate. Hope you'll join the others out there. There's still time to do it. For today's Lunch and Learn, we are hearing from Buffalo Niagara Waterkeeper's Deputy Executive Director of Strategic Initiatives, Carrie Gallo. The virtual meeting will highlight the feasibility study currently taking place along Scajaquada Creek within the town of Cheektowaga. We're working with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers Buffalo District to conduct this study. So we'll be taking questions after she's done. You can type them in the chat within the Q&A at any point, and we'll go through those after the presentation. So feel free to ask at any point. But at this point, I'm going to let Carrie take it away now.
Great, thank you, Adam. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. I am going to share my screen. Great. All right, well, as Adam said, we're here today to talk about the Scajaquada Creek environmental improvement effort. This is a project that is happening in partnership with Buffalo Niagara Waterkeeper and the United States Army Corps of Engineers. So before we dive into the details, I do want to give you a little bit of background about who we are and what we do and why we're doing all these great environmental restoration initiatives. So who are we? Buffalo Niagara Waterkeeper. We are an environmental not-for-profit organization. And if you've joined us before, or even if you haven't, we have been around for 35 years. Our mission is to protect the quality and the quantity of our freshwater and its surrounding ecosystems for both our current and future generations. So we do this in a lot of ways. We have a staff of about 23 folks. Their backgrounds are all kinds of different disciplines. So we have on an annual basis, anywhere between 45 and 60 individual projects and programs that we're implementing. These programs are geared towards protecting our clean water and our freshwater resources, restoring the health of our ecosystems, getting people out on the water. And you sometimes see us out there in our kayaks. Sometimes you join us for hiking tours, for biking tours. And all of that is connected back to inspiring economic growth and community revitalization. So where do we do all of this work? So the Niagara River Lake Erie watershed, this is a newly expanded jurisdiction for Buffalo Niagara Waterkeeper. So we work within portions of 8 Western New York counties. The watershed boundary stretches all the way from the Lake Ontario shoreline down along the Niagara River and down through the Lake Erie coast to the Pennsylvania border. So within these land areas, we have over 5,000 miles of streams, so tributary streams and different kinds of waterways. The land area itself is 2,500 square miles. There are 3 sovereign nations within the boundary. So we've got the Seneca Nation, the Tuscarora, and the Tonawanda nations. In addition, I like to point out to people, I know it seems obvious, but the significance of having a watershed that shares an international boundary is something really unique and really important. So every day we sit, in our offices and our homes, and we have the benefit of seeing 20% of the world's fresh water flow by our doorstep every single day. That's really unique, but we share that waterway with Canada. And so while we have our own governments and we're each doing our own things to restore the resource, it's also important to know that water doesn't really care too much about those boundaries. So it is a shared resource. It's really important that we work with our partners to figure out how to best protect and restore this resource. All right, so just taking it back one little step, because I'm going to be using the word watershed a lot throughout this presentation, I just wanted to be sure that we're all working from the same page. So, watershed is that area on the land where all of the water drains into a shared waterway. So that image that you're seeing it's on my left side of the screen is kind of the theoretical. A drop of rain falls on the land, it runs down the hillside and into the waterway. Essentially, that's a watershed. However, urban watersheds are complicated. We've got all kinds of different things that interfere with how a watershed would work in theory. And so we've got industrialization, we've got lots of impervious surfaces such as pavement and roadways, we've got wastewater treatment plants, we've got water utilities, we have people's homes, swimming pools, so things that prevent that water from easily going back into the ground and eventually making its way into a creek or a lake. So that's important to know because Scajaquada Creek, as we'll be talking about this watershed today, is a highly impaired watershed. And one of the reasons that it's highly impaired is because it's got a lot of really human-induced constraints on it, a lot of development. So the Scajaquada Creek watershed. So here it is. This watershed is actually a pretty cool watershed when we think about it in the context of our whole working area. And one of the reasons for that is that its waterways are really sustained by springs and aquifers. And so, you know, hope springs eternal is the phrase, and so goes with Scajaquada Creek. Even though it has a lot of impairment, it's one of the most degraded waterways in our region, there's still an opportunity to provide ecosystem repairs and ecosystem improvement because it has that fresh spring water input all throughout its system. So historically, Scajaquada Creek began in the town of Lancaster and flows towards Lake Erie and the Niagara River through the village of Depew into the town of Cheektowaga, and then it goes underground for about 3.5 miles through the city of Buffalo. It pops back out in Forest Lawn Cemetery, one of our Olmsted parks, and then it carries on until it meets the Black Rock Canal in the Niagara River. So essentially, it becomes part of our drinking water system. So that's another really important reason that we should all care about the health of Scajaquada Creek. Okay, I wanted to give you some historical context for what this watershed once looked like because we're going to be talking about, repairing and restoring a watershed. And so this is a map from 1927. I know you can't see the details very well, but the details for this purpose, I want you to look at some big picture landscape scale takeaways. So we're going to be looking at 3 different areas. That red circle is the town of Lancaster. The yellow circle is moving into the eastern section of Cheektowaga, and the purple is going to be the westernmost section of Cheektowaga. So we're going to look at them each a little more closely. So here's the town of Lancaster in 1927. Really the important takeaway from this image is, what do we see? We see a lot of undeveloped land. We see a lot of agriculture. All those white blotches on the screen below are agricultural lands. We don't see a lot of development. If you kind of look a little bit more closely, you can see what looks like braiding, like threads. All of those threads and braiding are tributaries that are pieces of the original Scajaquada Creek. Moving into the town of Cheektowaga, again, here we are on the eastern section that's highlighted in that yellow circle. This is really important context for what Scajaquada Creek looked like in 1927, not all, but a lot of the development. So you can see in the middle of this panel here, at the bottom of this slide, is the main stem of Scajaquada Creek. If you look just on either side of the creek in many places, you can see kind of that soft, fuzzy nature of the landscape. Those are wetland areas. Again, still a lot of agriculture. We've got some major highways running through here, but not a lot of development. And then here's what we're looking at today. So you can see that our creek is no longer squiggly. It's not a technical term, but I think it's a term everyone recognizes. It's been channelized. Creeks in a natural setting are not typically straight and narrow like you see on this screen. Rather, they are sinuous and curvy. And so there's been a lot of alteration to this creek. You'll see in some of the pictures on the bottom of the screen. This happens to be Cheektowaga Town Park, surrounded by almost a completely built environment. So as of today, land use in the town of Cheektowaga is 96% developed, and the remaining percentages are for open space, open water, and wetlands. So it is a largely developed watershed and a largely human impacted waterway. So what are some of the key issues of this watershed? So again, up on the screen here is that same watershed for Scajaquada Creek, except it tells you a little bit more about what's happening in each of those sections. And so you can see that big green space, the little green dots in the middle, that's where the Scajaquada Creek actually goes underground at Pine Ridge Road and then pops up again in Forest Lawn Cemetery. If we go out east, you can see the towns of Cheektowaga, Depew, and Lancaster. You can see that the creek has been channelized. And then that little green, what is it? Not really a rectangle, but almost a rectangle where it says federal flood control. That's what we're going to be talking about today. So some of the key issues plaguing this creek, we have really old and outdated stormwater infrastructure. And so in the town of Cheektowaga in particular, there's a lot more stormwater that's coming off of the land in a rain event than the old pipes can handle. So that means we get these overflow events where all that stormwater combines with the sewer water coming out of individual homes and it has nowhere to go. And so there's built-in exit strategies to our old infrastructure where it overflows, designed to overflow into the creeks. So we've got a lot of sewage in our creeks. We've got a lot of E. coli in our creek, Scajaquada Creek in particular. And as you can imagine, that's not good for humans. It's not good for the ecosystem. It's not good for wildlife. As I showed you in those historical pictures, we also have a lot of loss of wetlands that have happened in the Scajaquada Creek corridor, loss of habitat in general. And again, most of that in this particular watershed is due to development pressure and just having a really urbanized context. So the Scajaquada Creek Section 1135 Continuing Authorities Program is what we are going to move into. So I'm really excited to talk to you today about this program because it is a very unique opportunity, and we have been working on this particular opportunity for the past 20 years at Waterkeeper. An effort like this is something that takes a long time to put together. It takes a lot of approvals to put into place, and it takes some funding so that we can make it happen. So we'll just start talking about this. Why do we need to restore some flood control structure projects in the town of Cheektowaga? Well, in order to answer that question, we have to first look at, well, why were they built? Why did the town of Cheektowaga, why did the Army Corps of Engineers, why did the Department of Environmental Conservation decide to build flood risk management structures in the first place? Well, because there was a lot of flooding at one point. So again, from the late 70s through the 80s, there was a series of things that occurred that really increased the urban development throughout the watershed. And as the urban development increased, flooding increased. Again, you have less spaces for the water to infiltrate down through the soil when it rains. Instead, it runs off into our creeks and our waterways and then ends up flooding the banks. So a couple other turning points in the history of Scajaquada Creek. Flooding was once limited to the city of Buffalo. Again, as that development started to move east out into the suburbs, flooding started to spread east with it. Another key milestone in the development of the creek was that tributary flows. So all those little Brady things we were looking at on the 1927 aerials, the tributary flows were diverted into that main channel of Scajaquada Creek to accommodate development that was happening with the Buffalo Airport building and then the Kensington Expressway development. And ultimately, if you look back on the historical documents, there were decisions made, and they're practical decisions. That this is common throughout our area as urban development kind of spreads out into the suburbs, but urban development potential along Scajaquada Creek was prioritized over environmental protection. So in Cheektowaga, the reason that they decided they needed to do something about the flooding was because in August of 1963, there was a flood that inundated approximately 132 acres in the city of Buffalo. There were 517 acres impacted in Cheektowaga, 64 acres in the village of Depew, and 15 acres in the town of Lancaster. So that was the tipping point. There had been a series of small floods previously, but this 1963 flood was really the tipping point at which the communities got together and said something needs to be done. Again, concurrently, what's happening on the downstream? Well, because of some of those contaminated waterways that we were starting to see, some of those sewage pollution problems, the wisdom at the time was, well, let's bury the creek. If we can't see it, there must not be a problem there. So burying of the creek began in that section that I described from Pine Ridge Road until Forest Lawn Cemetery in the late 1920s. This is a picture of when that was happening. And then I think the final, proverbial nail in the coffin for Scajaquada Creek came with the building of the Galleria Mall in the 1980s. The Galleria Mall was built on top of those wetland areas that we saw in those aerials along Scajaquada Creek, and the creek still runs underneath the Galleria Mall today. But as you can imagine, that severely limits the opportunities for connectivity, for wildlife, for habitat, and for water quality benefits. So the Army Corps came up with a plan. They decided that what we really needed to do was to manage and control that flooding. So they constructed a plan. They studied a plan, I should say, that came up with a bunch of alternatives. And the alternatives that they selected constructed about 9,000 feet of channel improvement. So again, it took that sinuous, curvy Scajaquada Creek that was causing some flooding and straightened it. If we can move water faster and we can move water downstream, then it's somebody else's problem. We get it out of here. Um, so there was a lot of channel improvements, things like lining the channels with concrete to not have so much interference from, woody plant materials, things like that. We replaced culverts, created new culverts, created some conduits, sealed some sanitary manholes so that they could be flood proofed. All of these improvements resulted in the Scajaquada Creek Flood Risk Management Project that was completed in 1981. So again, the purpose of this project was to protect the neighborhood and the residents and the towns from floods that were occurring in that 100-year recurrence interval, which was occurring more and more frequently. The overall scope of this project that you're seeing here on the screen was about 6 miles of improved channel. And when we use the word improved, it doesn't mean it made it better necessarily. It means that there was something done to it, some man-made thing that was done to take it from its previous form to its current form for a specific purpose. And this purpose, it's in the context of flood mitigation. So that involved 1.8 miles of the main stem, which is that main piece of Scajaquada Creek, and another 4.3 miles of those braided tributaries that you were seeing. As I said, as part of what they were in the process to decide what was going to be built, they did consider a whole bunch of alternatives. And at the end of the day, I talked about, there being some conscious decision making about prioritizing economic development over environmental restoration. That's not really a judgment statement. It's just sort of a statement of, if you look at the selected alternatives, it was the most extensive in terms of potential impact on the stream itself. There were 35 acres of aquatic and terrestrial habitats disturbed versus 0 acres that would have been disturbed for all of the other alternatives. So this is really just, again, not a criticism, just sharing some information from the original documentation from the late 1970s. So what are we doing about that today? Well, the Army Corps of Engineers has a really cool project, and it is called the 1135 Continuing Authorities Program. And what that means is it's a program that allows the Army Corps of Engineers to take a look back at some of their past projects and to provide, I guess, an assessment of what kinds of ecological impacts might have occurred as a result of that project. In this case, this 1135 authority allowed the Corps of Engineers to look at those flood risk management structures that were constructed and confirm that there were, in fact, negative ecological impacts of that 1981 construction effort. Some of those impacts include creek channelization. We have degraded water quality. We definitely have a loss of habitat and riparian areas. Lots of invasive species. Invasive species love disturbed areas. So anytime we have that kind of a situation, it just is a breeding ground for invasive species. So this study that we are undergoing right now allows the Army Corps of Engineers to evaluate what would some feasible alternatives be to implement some ecosystem restoration alternatives that would provide some improved habitat and offset the negative impacts that are associated with that flood risk management structure. So through this feasibility study, Buffalo Niagara Waterkeeper and the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers are partnered to develop a suite of alternatives that could look to restore ecosystem services, ecosystem benefit, and also try to integrate the residents and the communities into those alternatives to make what we have along Scajaquada Creek an even better situation. I should point out, because this is a really important point, is that any of the alternatives that are developed as part of this feasibility study, they must first and foremost maintain the flood risk reduction features of those risk management structures. So we can't propose anything that would, make the flood mitigation that is currently being provided by these structures less. Everything that we would be proposing or looking to do would be to offset ecological loss either adjacent to the risk management structures or in another area within the town of Cheektowaga. So that's what you'll see moving forward. Excuse me for 1 minute. So the feasibility study area that is shown here on the screen below. And basically, to give you some geographic context, the project limits are Pine Ridge Road to the west. So again, that's where Scajaquada Creek goes underground. There is a big cemetery right there. To the west, the Kensington Expressway forms the boundary. I'm sorry, to the north, the Kensington Expressway forms a boundary. To the east, Dick Road is a project boundary, and to the south, Galleria Drive. So everything that we're looking to potentially propose some alternatives within is located in that area. I also want to take a second to mention that the town of Cheektowaga and the Department of Environmental Conservation are also project partners in this. Currently, the flood risk management structures are owned and operated by the Department of Environmental Conservation, and the town of Cheektowaga is responsible for their maintenance and upkeep. So what does this study give the authority do? And what are we trying to achieve here? So again, we are looking to make some modifications to the existing flood risk management structures, to restore aquatic habitats, to improve wetland size and quality, to improve riparian habitat, and to improve some of that sediment and nutrient transport so the creek is a little healthier. I want to emphasize that one of the, I think, coolest aspects of this project is the power of partnership. So how does this type of project actually work? Well, in order to kick off this continuing authorities program that enables this effort, the federal government, the Corps of Engineers in this case, requires a local sponsor or a local cost share partner. So what that means is that the Army Corps of Engineers and Buffalo Niagara Waterkeeper sign an agreement that we want to conduct a feasibility study to address the degraded conditions associated with those flood risk management structures. We sign an actual piece of paper. Federal government is able to then unlock federal dollars, and Buffalo Niagara Waterkeeper is responsible for securing local matching funds to help with that effort. So the combined effort then becomes bigger than just if one of us was doing such a thing. So for Buffalo Niagara Waterkeeper's non-federal sponsor and our cost share match of this project, we were able to secure funding through the Ralph Wilson Foundation, the Margaret Went Foundation. We have some funding that goes through the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation that both Assemblywoman Monica Wallace and Senator Sean Ryan worked hard to help us secure. Okay, on the tail end of this presentation, I do want to go through what are the alternatives we're looking at. So we are at the point in this process where the Corps of Engineers has done a fair amount of field study. They've gone out and looked at the world of opportunities. I should also say that this study was not limited to just the town of Cheektowaga. So the Corps of Engineers did have the authority to look outside the town. They could look in Depew, they could look in Lancaster, they could even look downstream in the city of Buffalo, as long as it's within the Scajaquada Creek watershed. So a pretty comprehensive field effort was conducted over the past year or so to go out and find the world of opportunities. And at the conclusion of that effort, the Corps of Engineers really narrowed it down to 6 possible alternatives. So through this feasibility study, the Corps will be looking at 6 potential alternatives to conduct ecosystem improvements, and they will be also calculating what is the value of each of those alternatives and what do each of those alternatives cost. So at the end of the day, when the study is complete, we will have a document of 6 proposed alternatives studied. We will have a recommended set of best alternatives, and then the study will then allow one of those alternatives or 2 of those alternatives to be picked up during the next phase, which would be the design phase, and then implemented at a later date. So we're kind of doing the groundwork here to do the study, to do all the, back of the room stuff that needs to happen to tee up future projects. So alternative number two, I'm just going to jump right into these. And why does it start at number two? It's kind of an oddly number thing. Just know that there are 6 alternatives. What you see on the screen labeled as alternative two may look different than how I'm describing them. So alternative one was actually a no action alternative. So that means every time the Corps of Engineers does a study like this, the no do nothing alternative has to be studied. What are the pros and what are the cons of doing nothing? So I didn't even include that. I thought I would just tell you about it. So jumping right into alternative two, the Corps of Engineers identified a series of sites. There were 4 sites in particular, but by site, sometimes it's a very long linear stretch that would be suitable for native riparian corridor restoration. So this means that we would go in, we would remove invasive species, we would put native plantings back. This alternative does not happen within the flood restoration project footprint. So it would be happening either adjacent to or nearby. Really, this is opportunities. Where do we have land? Where do we have need? Where would these things align to benefit water quality? So what are the pros of this alternative? Well, it's a low cost alternative because it really is invasive species treatment and then planting, and that there are multiple places that we would be doing it. So it would be nice to see this sort of connectivity across the landscape. What are the cons for this alternative? Unfortunately, under the Army Corps of Engineers authorities, they are only allowed to do a one-time herbicide application when it gets to the implementation or the construction stage. And for those of you that are familiar with invasive species management, that's really tricky. So unfortunately, most invasive species eradication takes more than one treatment. So there are some concerns about how feasible would this alternative be, particularly when there's no funding for long-term stewardship through the continuing authorities program. Alternative three, this site has been identified at the Maryvale school system. So this is a really exciting alternative. It's probably my favorite alternative, mostly because we have a lot of opportunity to get some nice co-benefits out of the project. So what the Army Corps of Engineers is studying with this proposal is design for a 2-stage flood channel creation. What does that mean? Well, it's kind of like a floodplain bench. So you would have, an area adjacent to the creek that would be restored with native plantings to intercept floodwater, and then you would have a second tier of that, which would just be at a slightly higher elevation. So you would get this really nicely terraced wetland riparian corridor establishment. And for anybody that's been to Forest Lawn Cemetery recently, that is the exact type of restoration that's happening in the area behind the chapel, and that has happened in sections of the cemetery close to the Delaware S curve. So if you need a visual, that is what a 2-stage flood channel creation and a floodplain bench would look like. So this opportunity for ecosystem restoration has a lot of actual ecosystem benefits. It's got enough land area. There would be removal of a tributary floodgate that's happening. So, that water could then flow freely. And then again, I mentioned co-benefits. So one of the coolest aspects of this project would be there's a potential to build a living classroom in association with the Maryvale School District. You can see the school is right there. The ball fields are right there, which also brings me to the cons. There are some potential conflicts with the recreational amenities. So part of the study has to be sitting down and having some conversations with the school district, which have begun, but we need to look at in earnest what really is possible. How much land is the school willing to contribute towards this restoration, and how many acres of benefit will we get out of it? Okay, I'm moving on to what I'm calling alternative 3, even though it says alternative 5A on the screen. So this is called the T3A restoration. And through this alternative, we would really be looking at removing some concrete. So the creek in this section, if you can envision it from some of those pictures I showed you earlier, have a concrete lining to them, which isn't good for water quality. It isn't good for habitat. It's meant to move water and move water fast. So we would be removing some of those structures and then planting native vegetation. As you can see, it's a pretty small site. It's spatially limited due to development on either side, and it may or may not be the most feasible alternative due to concern over impacting some of those flood control functions, which, as I stated earlier, we are not able to do. Anything that we propose has a negative impact on the flood control function, then it's immediately disqualified. So moving on to the next alternative, again, this is, I would say, a front runner in the study so far. So Cheektowaga Town Park, again, there's another two-stage channel being looked at. So that same idea of a floodplain bench where you've got the terracing happening, lots of opportunity for reconnecting the floodplain, reestablishing some wetland areas, some meadow areas, some riparian plantings. And one of the co-benefits associated with this project is obviously that it's within the town park. So there's a great opportunity to integrate some trails, to get people more intentionally up to the creek and have it be a more pleasant experience, and to convert some of that mowed lawn, which there's a lot of mowed lawn at the park, so there would still be plenty of room for picnicking and hanging out, but this would take some of those areas closest to the creek and return them sort of to more of an ecosystem function, still allowing people to get up close and personal to the creek. Again, if you've been to Forest Lawn, you can kind of envision what that might look like, how there's those trail systems put in place that allow people to really get up close and personal. What are some of the cons to this alternative? Maintenance. This is one of the larger project sites. So with any restoration, you're looking at realistically 5 or 6 years before it could be considered self-sustaining. And in that period of establishment, it needs a lot of ongoing maintenance. So, would the town of Cheektowaga be able to help with that? What would the maintenance look like? Is that something Buffalo and I or Waterkeeper could partner on? Those are the kinds of questions that we're looking at right now. And then we also do have a utility line constraint. So that's another thing just to think about. The next alternative is a T3 wetland complex. So this is located near George Urban Boulevard and the 190. You can kind of see George Urban there to the south. Again, kind of a smallish site, but a little bit more opportunity to create an actual wetland area, which is what's being shown in that purple shading that you're seeing there. So riparian connection, reconnect the stream to its floodplain, create some wetland areas. A lot of upland ecosystem benefits to this one, but there are limited aquatic benefits. The site is also constrained by George Urban Boulevard on the south. So as you can see, it kind of gets skinny and tapers off there. We have some adjacent power utility lines. All of those constraints raise some concerns about cost effectiveness. So that was a real quick overview of the proposed alternatives that are being studied. So in terms of process, what else is going on while we're studying alternatives? What else is going on through this process? Well, in August 13th to be exact, Buffalo Niagara Waterkeeper and the Corps of Engineers held a public meeting at the Julia Boyer Reinstein Library in Cheektowaga. And this was really an opportunity for the public to come listen to a quick presentation about the feasibility study, but then also, if you can see in these images, we had posters located around the room. So the idea was that, we spent 5 minutes just giving an overview, but we really spent the bulk of the time talking with people. What do you think about this alternative? Do you live near here? Is there something else that we haven't thought of? What are the pros? What are the cons? So that was a really great opportunity for the public to provide comments, to get any concerns asked, to ask some questions. That comment period, a formal comment period on the scoping document was open until it was actually September 21st, not September 2nd. That's a typo. So that recently closed. And then moving forward, again, that sort of early scoping period with the feedback was completed just the 21st, so a couple of days ago. Moving forward, the Corps of Engineers will complete their study, will take all the feedback that they received, and they will tentatively select their suite of preferred alternatives by the end of November. And then from, I would say, November all the way through the spring, there'll be some more studies. There's things like hydrology that has to be studied, cost effectiveness, return on investment, all those number crunching things will be going on behind the scenes. And then we'll be preparing for another public review period for the recommended alternatives that come out of the study in October of 2025. And then in April of 2026, we anticipate that the final report with its selected alternatives, its cost estimates will be complete by April of 2026. So I have some links up here on the screen. If you would like to learn more about the feasibility study, you can go to our website at bnwaterkeeper.org and you can click on the links to follow the Scajaquada feasibility study. And then I just wanted to leave you, with a couple of hopeful thoughts here. Again, there is hope for Scajaquada. Scajaquada Creek may not be home to everybody, but it's home to someone. And it has wildlife, despite its degradation, there is wildlife along its shores. There is that spring water. There is an opportunity to restore wetlands, to get some ecosystem improvement happening along the creek, and to improve water quality, starting way up in the headwaters, and then carry that improved water quality all the way down into the city of Buffalo. That's all I have for you today. Thank you very much for attending, and I will take any questions that you have.
Thanks, Carrie. At this point, we don't see any questions. I'll give people a moment to type them into the Q&A or in the chat if you have anything for Carrie. Thank you again for attending. We'll be getting this as a recording, send it out. So everyone who wanted to rewatch it, check it out. We'll send it out in an email directly to you. You'll be able to follow up on that. We'll send some of the links. We have imagery from some of those historic things on our website Carrie was showing as far as Scajaquada Creek. So we'll send you those things and you can view that and actually click on it, see it in greater detail and follow up. A lot of really cool stuff on the website, as Carrie said, bnwaterkeeper.org. That's where we've got most of it, and just search for Scajaquada Creek and you'll find a lot of info. Yeah, at this point, if I don't see anything else, you can feel free to reach out to us at any point too. Info@bnwaterkeeper.org is a good email to use and ask any questions and follow up with us on that. Like I said, we'll be sending this info out to you in an email later this week. So thank you again. Again, the Solo Sweep Challenge is ongoing, so hopefully you'll sign up for that and go clean up around the Scajaquada Creek watershed. It's a really cool project, and we'll be continuing on some solo sweep challenges over the year. We'll alert you to those too. But for now, we'll close out, and thanks again. Bye.